Last time we did a review. We talked about prayer times. So if you see these contents I have here on the left side, we talked about the prayer times, just the hadith. We went through. We didn't read the details of all the prayer times one by one, and we talked about forbidden prayer times as a muraja'ah, a review, because I wanted to review some things anyway before I moved forward with you. And in this book of prayer level 3, level 3 is the name of this series that we're doing, but this is just book of prayer. Um, this book here, the title is Halawatul Fiqh, the sweetness of fiqh. This is the book of prayer from the sweetness of fiqh. Level 3, because first we read the metin, then we did Lubul Kifaya, the explanation of Abu Shuja'. That was level 2. And now we're doing this level 3, just book of prayer. We're repeating the same chapters of prayer each time with more details. So we already covered all these prayer times here: noon prayer, afternoon prayer, sunset prayer, nightfall prayer. And then after that, there's a digression because shortening and combining pertain to these four. Shortening and combining pertain to these four. Before we talked about dawn prayer, we talked about shortening and combining. And then after we talked about the obligatory prayers, we talked about voluntary prayers. Then after talking about the voluntary prayers, we started talking about the conditions of prayers, conditions of prayer. Talked about purification, covering, and facing the Qibla, all with details, because it's level 3. Then, so imagine that now you want to pray. So you're going to make your purification, then you're going to cover, for example, and then you're going to face the Qibla. And then you're going to call the adhan and make the iqamah. And then there are integrals of the prayer. We went through those integrals: intending, standing, takbir, fatiha, bowing, rising, prostrating, and we even covered sitting between the prostrations. And we covered the last sitting, and we covered the tashahhud. That's when we went over the tashahhuds of all the four schools. That's as far as we got here. And as I'm running through these contents, you can see there's some headings I skipped, because in between the integrals, optional things were inserted. And amongst the optional things that's here is saying subhanallah. This one we didn't read it. I skipped this so that I could review it first. So we did the bowing, the rising. We did also supplication while standing in dua al-kunut here, and prostrating. And then we went to sitting between the prostrations. I skipped saying subhanallah. And then we did the last sitting, and then the tashahhud. So before we move on past the tashahhud to the next one, the prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, let's review, let's back up and catch what we missed from this digression here, saying subhanallah. So the author says digression, saying subhanallah. Why is it digression? Because it's put in the midst of these integrals. Why don't those optional things just have their own section like in Abu Shuja'? Why they are mixed in between the integrals to offer a different sequence, to offer a different presentation, and not just to follow the sequence of Abu Shuja', but still all taken from the explanations of Abu Shuja' mostly. So saying Subhanallah means I clear Allah from all non-befitting attributes, because tasbih means clearing and making far. Clearing and making far. Exalting. Clearing means exalting, exonerating, and making far. That's literal sense. Like how you say ta'ala literally, or al-ulu in a literal sense means to be high, but it also has the meaning of majesty and greatness. So tasbih, so these root letters, sin, ba, ha, they have the meaning of clearing, exalting, and making far. So just like highness has a figurative meaning, farness has figurative meaning. In this context, the farness is far from imperfection. Farness from imperfection. Mm. So you have these root letters here, sin, ba, ha. And we've presented here two words actually here. This one, subhan, and this word here, tasbih. So they mean the same thing. Subhan and tasbih, they mean the same thing, which is that both of these are source nouns. Source nouns. Actually, notice the pattern of subhan is like the pattern of Quran in pattern, the sound, and like ghufran and other words, qurban. So subhanallah, it means, when you say subhanallah, there's an implied verb. An implied verb, the the implication, the verb you are implying is I glorify, I exalt. يعني أسبح سبحانا أسبح تسبيحا. When you say subhanallah, it's like you're saying أسبح تسبيحا أسبح أسبح الله تسبيحا. I glorify Allah, glorification, when you say subhanallah. So this formula here, subhanallah, that's as much as we've mentioned so far. It is recommended for bowing and prostrating. So that statement means if you bow and say, if you bow and you say subhanallah only, and if you prostrate and merely say subhanallah, then you did the sunnah, the minimum sunnah. The minimal sunnah is achieved by saying it once. Subhanallah. With good pronunciation, you have sin and ha. Subhanallah. And the name of Allah has ha at the end. Subhanallah. And the least excellent sunnah is for an individual, someone praying alone, or an imam of a limited group who accepts extending the prayer, is to say thrice, 3 times, is to say it thrice, 3 times. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. As in the hadith of Hudhayfa, saying it 3 times. Saying it 3 times is in the hadith of Hudhayfa. I'm not saying just saying Subhanallah only is in the hadith of Hudhayfa. And the utmost perfection is from 9 to 11. 9 to 11. That's in terms of number. But what do we say here? The minimal sunnah for an individual, not the minimal, sorry. The least excellent sunnah for an individual, or here, an imam of a limited group who accepts extending the prayer. Remember that case there, because repeats in the book of prayer. The case of the imam of a limited group who accepts, the group accepts extending the prayer. They accept for the imam to extend the prayer. Like you're in someone's house and it's just whoever is there. No one else is going to come. So they are a limited group and they accept for the imam to extend the prayer. As opposed to what? Being in the masjid, for example, and you are the imam, then you don't extend the prayer here. Extending it meaning going beyond the least excellent. Going beyond the least excellent. Least excellent is 3 times. So in other words, the imam, he can go up to 3 times. The tasbih, in the bowing and in the prostrating. So he doesn't do 4 times or add something else in that position. Then he will be extending. For each bow, Muslim narrated the Prophet's technique of saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, and that's going to be 3 times. And for prostrating, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, 3 times. Minimum excellence, the minimum excellence. So there's a sunnah, like just to say Subhanallah only 1 time. Then there's a minimal excellence, like to say Subhana Rabbiyal A'la 3 times in sujood, or Subhana Rabbiyal Azim 3 times in ruku'. And there's utmost perfection from 9 to 11 times. But the Imam, uh, it's not like this case, not the Imam of a limited group who accepts extending the prayer. He does not go to 9, from 9 to 11. Doesn't go beyond 3. Any question there? You said you mentioned the one in the house and the Imam, but then if someone is praying in Jama'ah in another scenario, would they have to ask before the prayer to be able to do 3? You don't have to ask to be able to do 3. 3 is the minimum perfection, and that one you don't need any permission for. Does that answer your question? Amin Wafiq. Now, we already read sitting between the prostrations and the last sitting and the tashahhud. Now we want to read about prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and for his family and the Abrahamic prayer. Prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after reciting the tashahhud is an integral according to the Shafi'i school, as opposed to the other 3. Yani, according to the other 3, if you don't say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, then you did not miss an integral of the prayer. As Shafi'i's proof that it is an integral is the command in Surah Al-Ahzab, ayah 56, إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Surely Allah blesses and honors the Prophet, and his angels supplicate for him with honor. O those who have believed, make those special supplications for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and send the salam upon him, meaning say the likes of sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you might say, I don't see where's the proof that this is in the prayer. This is an integral of the prayer. His argument is that the most deserving time for obeying this command is during prayer, meaning there's a command in there, which is right here. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. O those who have believed, pray for Muhammad and send the salam upon him. That's a command. So that means you have to do something. It's being demanded of you to do something here. So when you're going to do that and how you're going to do that. Okay, so Ash-Shafi'i has an answer for you. The most deserving time for obeying this command is during prayer. Like the report of Ka'b ibn Ujrah asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, how should we pray for you in the prayer? That's how he asked the Prophet. That's what he asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How should we pray for you in the prayer? So Ash-Shafi'i saying, so you see, this is in the prayer. Then the most appropriate placement. So when you're going to do this obligation in the prayer, where in the prayer the most appropriate placement for it is with the tashahhud, as Al-Ghazali said. And with here means after. That's why sometimes say the tashahhud, you mean also as-salatu ala nabi. With the tashahhud, meaning after the tashahhud. Like in Al-Majmu' mentions after. So some of the Shafi'is, they said the prayer for the Prophet is with the tashahhud. And others, they said the prayer for the Prophet is after the tashahhud. And they are saying the same thing here. With, for those who said with, means after. And Ash-Shafi'i documented that after. Therefore, it comes in the sitting position. Yani. Therefore, yani. On top of that, there's further indication that it should be in the sitting position or the seated position. So usually when you learn about these integrals of the prayer, you learn what the integral is and yani, how to do it and where to put it. So now this is telling you the reasoning and the sources of these things. The two sheikhs report that Ibn Mas'ud said that Bashir ibn Sa'd said to the Prophet, Sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Allah commanded us to pray for you. How then should we pray for you? The Prophet Sallallahu alayhi wasallam told them to say what the Shafi'is deem the minimum integral. The Prophet told them to say something, and this thing that he told them to say is what the Shafi'is deem to be the minimum integral. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Also sufficient is to say Sallallahu ala Muhammad or ala Rasulih or ala Nabi. All of that's valid. Insufficient is saying Allahumma salli alayh. Oh Allah, send the salah upon him. That's not valid. Or ala Ahmad. Al-Basir documents that. It's not enough to say ala Ahmad. And instead of saying let's say adding, because it's not narrated, Sayyidina ala Sayyidina, our master Muhammad, is permissible. The word Sayyidina, as opposed to the Wahhabis, yani, in defiance of the Wahhabis who said it's not permissible. It is permissible, adding Sayyidina. There's no sin here because it does not remove the name of the action. But not saying it is better because it wasn't reported. It's not haram because it does not remove the name of the action. Meaning, if you said Sayyidina, you're still making salah on the Prophet. You're still doing what you were commanded to do, to make salah on the Prophet. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Prayer for his family is a prophetic recommendation, a sunnah, and was also said to be obligatory. That's a saying in the Shafi'i school, that prayer for his family is obligatory because the two sheikhs report that Ka'b ibn Ujra said, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam came out to us. So we said, we now know how to make salam on you. How should we make salat on you? He said, Qulu Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Meaning here, according to a report, they asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how should we make salah on you? So his answer included making salah on his family. Say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. And upon the al, O Allah, salli ala Muhammad, send the salat upon Muhammad, and wa ala ali Muhammad, and upon the family of Muhammad, until the end of the Abrahamic prayer, meaning this record here, this report, where he also added wa ala ali Muhammad, it continues and mentions the rest of the Abrahamic prayer, as-salatul Ibrahimiyah. Now, the strong saying, though, is that this making salat, yani praying for the Prophet's family, is not obligatory. Rather, you can make salat on the Prophet and make salat on his family and then keep going if you want. And then do the Abrahamic prayer, as-salatul Ibrahimiyah. As-salatul Ibrahimiyah, whose entirety is best recited in prayer, meaning this as-salatul Ibrahimiyah, this Abrahamic prayer, it is best to recite all of it in the prayer. So your obligation stops before the salam at Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That's what we say. Some added wa ala ali Muhammad, uh, but we don't say that saying. Rather, uh, that's sunnah to say wa ala ali Muhammad. Yani, you should not stop only before you say the salam. Don't just say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad and then stop, although you could. Better to not refrain from, yani, it's better to not abandon this recommendation here. Wa ala ali Muhammad. Perform that. Then stop if you want to stop. And if you want, you can keep going and say the whole Abrahamic prayer. كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Now I don't have transliteration here. Inshallah, make dua for me to put transliteration there. Then inshallah, I'll do it. I want to. Like how we have it for other things. Here we have transliteration for all the tashahuds. And also for dua al-kunut. And for some other dhikr is there. So yes. And for al-Fatiha, it's there. And the opening dua. So yeah, for sure. Inshallah. Okay. Now, any question? So now we just talked about the salat on the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and on his family. And before we end, inshallah ta'ala, let's read this digression, the first tashahhud. Why that's a digression, the first tashahhud, all the way down here before we're finished talking about the integrals of the prayer too. Let's take a look. So we have our prayer times. So we know why we have these four together, and then digression of combining and shortening. Then dawn prayer, voluntary prayers, conditions of prayer. Okay, then adhan and iqama. This is not a condition of prayer. Why it's here? Between this conditions of prayer and integrals of prayer is a sunnah, adhan and iqama. Because that's where it's going to be. After you have made wudu and covered yourself and faced the qibla, you're going to call the adhan and then make the iqama and then start your prayer. So we have the integrals of the prayer. We have the intention and the standing and the takbir. Intention and takbir go together. And standing too. All those three go together. And Fatiha with the standing also go together. So I think I might have to switch these two. Takbir number 2 after intending. We have some talk there too, but it makes sense. Intending and takbir are together. And you're going to do intending and takbir while standing. And standing and Fatiha are together. And you're going to do the Fatiha after you finish the takbir, that takbir that was with the intending. So it's better here to put takbir right after intending and put standing next to Fatiha. Then that's a better sequence. I'm not going to do it right now, though, because I might mess something up. Then bowing, then rising. Rising, then here at rising we put the dua that goes there, including dua al-kunut. So bowing, then rising, then prostrating. Then we did the digression for subhanallah after prostrating. Why? Because it includes bowing and prostrating. Saying subhanallah is for bowing and prostrating. So after we did both of them, then we brought the digression for saying subhanallah. Then sitting between the prostrations. So bowing, rising, prostrating, sitting between the two prostrations. Then the last sitting. That's how we learned it. Okay, now here I'm at the last sitting. Where could I have squeezed first tashahhud in? First tashahhud, there's no space here. That's why it got delayed. As far as the way this is packed now. Can't squeeze it in here. So last sitting, then tashahhud, then prayer for the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. Then the digression, first tashahhud. So this is catching the first tashahhud before we get out of the prayer. And we just finished talking about the tashahhud, which is the integral. So it's not far because we did the last sitting, then the tashahhud, then the prayer for the Prophet, that's short. And then there's a digression for the first tashahhud right after we finish talking about the obligatory one. But the obligatory one is the second one. The first tashahhud got mentioned here after the second one. So digression, the first tashahhud. It is the Prophet's technique in the authentic reports. The authentic reports that supersede the consensus about the sanctioning of the first tashahhud. So we're saying there's a consensus about the first tashahhud, and there are authentic hadiths about the first tashahhud. Authentic hadiths have superior status as evidence over consensus, but the consensus is still definitive evidence. But it's not a consensus that first tashahhud is integral, and it doesn't say that here. The consensus about the sanctioning of the first tashahhud. So you're paying attention to the words. When I read that, it said sanctioning, that should not have meant to you obligation. Maybe you don't know what it means. And then you would ask, what does that mean? Sanctioning here means was made part of the religion. It's legitimate. Even if the scholars differed amongst themselves about which is its ruling. Obligatory, sunnah, or something else. It is one of the recommended prayer segments. Segments? No. Components is the word we're going to use. Components. That if left out forgetfully or intentionally is recommended to prostrate for forgetfulness. So, it is one of the recommended prayer components. Component of prayer meaning what? Meaning it's a sunnah, not an integral, but it's type of sunnah that if you leave it out, you make sujudu sahu, prostration of forgetfulness, before the salam. So it is one of the recommended prayer components as opposed to what? Like we're saying components here. So the Arabic word is ba'd. But according to our lessons here, we're saying prayer has integrals and conditions and invalidators and has components and it has forms, hayat. So you're going to review all of that, inshallah ta'ala. You don't take that when you first take obligatory knowledge. You're just going to learn the integrals of the prayer and conditions and validators. So it is one of the recommended prayer components that, if left out forgetfully or intentionally, it is recommended to prostrate for forgetfulness before the salam, the first tashahhud. So it's not a form like putting your right hand over your left or like raising your finger when you're sitting. Rather, it's a component like dua al-kunut. Yani, it's a part of the prayer that it has some resemblance to the integrals of the prayer. This part of the prayer, this optional part of the prayer, has some resemblance to the integrals of the prayer as far as how significant it is, how obvious it is in the prayer. So that's how the first tashahhud is. If you left it out forgetfully or intentionally, it's recommended to prostrate for forgetfulness before the salam. So you might have a question. Why would I prostrate for forgetfulness if I left it out intentionally? And the answer is because the people who take care of their prayer, they don't leave it out intentionally. They only leave it out forgetfully. So the prostration is the prostration of forgetfulness. But if you leave it out intentionally, you did depreciate your prayer. You did depreciate your prayer like the one who did it forgetfully. If you leave it out intentionally, you depreciated your prayer like the one who left it out forgetfully. So you still have the same reason to prostrate, which is to patch that gap. And it's still going to have the same name. Prostration of forgetfulness, yani, to remind you not to leave that out. Before the salam, and next thing we have here is first salam. So next section should be what? According to yani, according to this, all this sequence here, looks like next section should be prostration of forgetfulness because its place is before the salam. So let's see what Allah wills. You said, would that prostration for not making the first tashahhud restore the reward? I haven't heard. I don't know. It must be done from any, by consensus, seated position. Yani. So we just mentioned two issues of consensus concerning the tashahhud. One is that the first tashahhud, it's sanctioned, even if the scholars differed about its judgment amongst themselves. And two, that it's done from a seated position. A seated position, that's indefinite. So that means that's why the word any is here. Any seated position by consensus. The consensus is about any. Any seated position. That means as long as your buttocks has landed, that means you're sitting. Though iftirash is best. The iftirash, you know the iftirash when you sit with your toes towards the qibla of your right foot, toes of your right foot, and your heel is up, and you're sitting on your left leg. That's the best sitting for the first tashahhud, but any seated position it can be done from by consensus. And it should be followed by prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This first tashahhud, it should be followed by prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this first tashahhud is sunnah, and that prayer for the Prophet is sunnah too. So neither one of these is the obligatory one at the end of the prayer. There's obligatory tashahhud at the end of the prayer, and prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after it. This one is sunnah, and the prayer for the Prophet with it is sunnah. What does with it mean? After it. And not for his family here at this position. First tashahhud, which is sunnah, then prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is sunnah here in this position, and then not prayer for his family here in this position, as Al-Basir said, because according to this saying, that not prayer for his family here, because here you are keeping this position light, not heavy. But what is weighty is that one should pray for them in this position, pray for the family of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in this position, but not prostrate for forgetfulness if he leaves it out in this position, as opposed to the end of the prayer. If you leave out praying for the family of the Prophet at the end of the prayer, then you should pray, you should prostrate for forgetfulness. So we'll see the chapter on prostrating for forgetfulness, inshallah ta'ala. I'm sure that's very important for many of you, including myself. Wallahu a'lam. We'll stop there. Do you have a question? Oh, there is a question here. If one leaves out the dua of qunut in the Fajr prayer, then are you obligated to perform a prostration of forgetfulness? No, it's not obligatory. It's sunnah. Ameen wa fiq. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك